Okay, so there are some fantastic new features on Procreate 5, and I'm just going to talk about one of them today. I am also going to be creating a full app guide that goes into all of the details of this brand new update. But for today, I'm just going to focus on the animation feature that they've recently added. Well, there was a slight animation feature before where you could do some little effects, whereas really now they've really integrated it in a much more comprehensive and useful way. Now, I'm not an animator, so this is new territory for me, but seeing as my channel has now reached over 150,000 subscribers, I felt it was about time that I had something a bit more professional looking at the beginning of my videos, a bit of an intro. So what I'll do is I'll explain some of the features on here and how I use them in my intro. I think it's easier to actually apply it to something that you've actually done rather than just talk about it in a kind of abstract way that has no context or has no application. If you've got I've got all the layers there that I've created for my animation anyway, but if you were starting out with a brand new canvas, you might give it a color background that you want to start with. And the first thing that you can do is go to your, like the wrench symbol, or in the UK we call it a spanner. Either way, it's the action part of the options on the top left. And you can see here now there is a new feature above drawing guide, which again, that's a relatively new feature only in the last sort of year or so. We also have animation assist. So you click that on and that instantly makes this pop up. And then now you can start to play around with some of the frames that you'd put within an animation. What I decided I wanted to do was have an image that had my name on it. And I wanted to create something where maybe like a cartoon version of the Apple Pencil actually sort of travelled, wrote something, and then travelled across my name and actually affected it and changed it. Now I created two stills. So I've got this one that I created within the text option here where you can add text. So I created that within Procreate 2. And then I created another slide where I wanted to have it end up to. So basically I wanted it to go from this one and I wanted to end up with that one, in addition to actually having some extra text here wherever are art tutorials as well. So the first thing I needed to do was to create that background. So once I'd done that and you've added a layer, because you're in the animation assist, it automatically puts it as a frame. So one of the things that you can actually do is that you can, if it's at the beginning, so if it's like the first one that you've got ticked at the bottom, it gives you an option of pressing on it and adding it as a background. So that means now that any other frames that I add to this are going to continue to do whatever they're doing over the top, but this is going to remain as a constant, as a background literally to everything else. When you want to add frames, very simply, quite self-explanatory, you just add a frame there and it instantly puts it there. And also within the layers, this is where it becomes situated. Now you can do all similar things that you would do with your normal sort of layer function. So it behaves pretty much like a layer, but it also behaves as a frame at this point. Now if you want to get rid of it, you just tap on it and you can either duplicate it. You can set however many frames you want it to perhaps hold on that. So if you create something and you don't want it to change for a few frames, then you can change how many frames that it actually holds it for. Now, I don't want it to hold at all. I don't want to duplicate it. I want to just get rid of it because that was just for demonstration purposes. Now there is an additional one here, so you can have a frame that you set as a foreground. So in addition to the background frame where everything goes over the top of it, you can have something that sits on top and is unaffected by everything else too. It will always stay on the top of whatever image and other frames you've actually created. So the first thing I decided I needed to do was to actually create an Apple Pencil sort of illustration. So all I did was I found a sort of cartoon drawing of a pencil off Google, off the internet, and I just created my own version from that. So I basically translated it into something that looked approximately like the Apple Pencil, but a cartoon version of it. So once I had created that as a layer, so you can either pop it in as a layer here, or you can use it as an add frame. Either way, it's there. So once I'd created this as a layer, I knew that the thing I wanted to have happen was that this pencil was then going to start writing art tutorials across the image. So the first thing I needed to do was to have it sort of incrementally move up. So the only way you can do that in animation obviously is to have frame by frame little small movements and adjustments. So I knew that at this point that I'd need to duplicate this image many times and have it shift position. So the easiest way to do that, if you want to retain all the information that's on that frame, is to press and hold, and you can see here that it's completely duplicated that frame. So you can see the little image that's contained within that, and it'll actually show you one here as well. Obviously, I've already created all of those, but these are the two that I've just added at this point. So this one is just a simple Apple Pencil, and this is a duplicate of that. So if I remove the original one, you can see that it's still there because I have two. So the way that then I would go about this is that I would select that and I would move it just a small amount, and that's my new frame. Now, because it's selected this one, which is the most recent one, rather than that one, and you can see that the overlaps change depending on which ones you actually select. So I've got that one selected at the moment, which is why it's on the foreground. I could simply do the same again, add frame, and I could move that too. It's really quite intuitive, quite a simple kind of process that really helps in all of this. So I'm just going to delete those and I'll show you some of the frames that I've actually created for the benefit of this animation. So that first one was one that I actually created. In fact, no, it wasn't. I'll get rid of that one. That one was. And you can see now, if I just step you through some of these different positions that I created for the Apple Pencil. And like I said, because I've got that frame selected, that's the one it shows as the foreground. It shows all the others, but if you want to see the most recent frame at the top, then you need to make sure that you have that one selected too. So I'll move this up until this position and you can see all the incremental steps. Now if I play that, you can see that part of the animation. You can also see that has started to draw in the text that I wanted added to it as well. Now there are obviously painting brushes that you could paint actually lettering with and get this kind of effect, but I wasn't going to be able to use that and have it appear as if the actual pencil was drawing it at the same time. So it seemed like it was going to be necessary to actually animate and draw in the impact that the pencil was having step by step. And if you can just follow this along, you can see I've got all these individual frames and you can see what the pencil is doing as it goes along. Now obviously I couldn't imagine this, so I used a layer that actually had the text on it, which was that, and I used that as a background. So all you need to do for that is shove it underneath everything else. You can see here there's lots and lots of frames. This is quite a complex process, quite time consuming to just create something quite straightforward, quite simple. But here we go. So I'm going to put it underneath everything, and you can see when I was doing my animations or different frames that they are on top. Now, one of the things you'll notice is that if I start to add additional frames to it, it slowly starts to disappear underneath them, and it reaches a point where it completely disappears. Totally. So one of the settings that you can actually change to improve that situation is that you can change the number of skins, it's called, so you can still see the image underneath. Now if you've got it set so that you can only see underneath, say, 2 of the frames, then you're never going to see anything that's that far back. Whereas I'm quite a few frames behind for that image, so I could set it all the way to max, which in this case it looks like it would be 12. You can also change the onion skin opacity so that you can make it slightly translucent, or you can make it almost completely translucent. So this is useful when you're doing lots and lots of layers on the top, and you can just keep track of what it is that you're trying to actually stencil over. So anyway, this is what I did step by step. So if I just add some of these on, you'll start to see the effect. Walk you through this. Quite time consuming. Now you can see at this point it only gives you a maximum of 12 frames that you can see underneath. So what I had to keep doing at this point was I had to keep, well, one of the options was to actually untick these boxes, because I'm only working at the top of this point, so I can untick all the ones that are actually interfering and getting in the way. You could move it up, but actually it's probably better just to untick the ones that are cluttering up this point in the animation and just work with maybe the previous 1 or 2. And that's what I kept doing as I went along. And I did that all the way along where it says Art Tutorials, and you can see there's lots and lots of frames for that. So I'm just going to switch them all back on so you can see. Now there is a limit to how many frames you can actually use in an animation. Now it depends on the canvas size. Now I didn't really think this far ahead when I started creating this, and it was quite frame intensive. And also the canvas that I actually created was not small to begin with. So I did reach my limit and then had to do the rest of the animation on a different canvas. One way that you can check how many you've used is if you go to your canvas information, you'll actually have an area within Procreate 5 now where you can actually have a look exactly what you've created. So you can see I've created quite a reasonably big canvas here, and I've got my layers, and you can see I've only got 4 layers available. So the settings that I've got on this canvas allows me to use 225 layers, which normally, if it was just a painting, is a huge amount. But when it comes to animation, that's not a lot at all, clearly. So I'm just going to switch them all back on. Okay, so by the time I've created all my frames, then you can just test how it's working, and you can then start to see it. Now there are all sorts of little glitches that I found along the way. So I had to kind of go back and identify. I mean, the easiest way I found of doing that was just to go frame by frame. And sometimes I'd find little specks and things that had happened that had kind of got in the way. Now, the reason they'd appeared and they'd become a bit of an issue was that the way that I was actually doing this was I had to keep tracing around the actual pencil, moving that and then filling in the kind of bit that where it's supposed to have coloured it in. The reason I was having to do that was because I was having to duplicate the layer. So let's just say that the pencil was at this point and it had created that, and that was underneath it. I duplicate that layer. It literally creates everything that's been created so far, and you can see this. So every frame is created what went before it, and then you change it and add some extra information. So what you can see here, if you, for example, you've got this one and the pencil is going in front of it, you duplicate it and you cut this part out of the pencil and move that to a different position, which would be here. Because you've cut it out of that frame, it leaves a gap, so you have to colour that bit in. It's a bit technical, a bit complicated, but it meant that essentially there were some glitches along the way as well. So if I just put all of these frames back in, you can see it run smoothly, and then I'll start to explain the next step, which has a completely different kind of approach, really. And this is one of the things I'm starting to discover about animation, is that there's not one way to achieve it, and for different kinds of effects, you have to approach it in different ways. Now, you see as it's playing back here, you have different settings. So you have one shot, which just means it runs it through once and then it stops. You can set it so it ping pongs, so it animates forward and then it animates it backwards as well. So it continuously kind of just loop backwards and forwards, or you can have it on loop. So when it reaches the end, it then just whizzes back to the beginning and does the same again. Another aspect of this is that you can change the frames per second. So if you wanted to speed it up and probably have it appear a little bit smoother, then you can have it going really fast. But if you wanted to slow it right down, obviously the animation isn't going to look quite as smooth at that point. You're going to see it a bit more jittery, but then also you can see some of the things that are actually happening a little bit better as well. So depending on the kind of video that you want to create, you can adjust it at that point. So rather than creating it and then having to slow it down or speed it up within your editing as an animation in film, then you can actually change the frame rate and speed it up or slow it down there before you even export it. Now you've also got a couple of extra tick things here, so you can colour secondary frames. So you can see here it starts to sort of colour reference it, so you can really spot the actual one that you're working on, because without that they all kind of blend in a little bit too much together. And you can also blend the primary frame so it really becomes equal to the rest of the things. But I don't know why you'd want to use that. Maybe there will be situations where that's useful, but for this particular one I really needed to know exactly where the current frame was. So you can either have it standing out even more, or you can have it sort of blended in. I'm sure there are applications for that. I've not really got my head around how I might use that yet, but I'm sure there are use cases for that. So once I'd created my animation and I was happy with it, I wanted to then export it. So you go onto here, you go onto share. Now you can share it as a different kind of thing. So you can share it as a PDF in which someone could just look through all the different frames, exactly the same as you would do with any other kind of sharing of a painting you've done in Procreate. Now obviously we want to share it as an animated thing. So if it was a small thing that only went for a second or two and only had a few frames, you might want to share it as a GIF or a GIF, but I want to share it as an animated MP4. Now at this point you can still change the frames per second. You can change it so it's much smaller. So if it's only going to appear ever as a small feature online, then you've got the web ready option, but I want it as maximum resolution. I can change at this point the frames per second, and all you do is export. And now it tells you the kind of general file size for this, and it's not actually that big at all. Although the actual Procreate file would be pretty big, the animated MP4 file size is not that big at all. Now if you put it as a web ready one, it's not even a megabyte, really small. And then you can export it. Again, it's not a massive file. I mean, this is taking longer than I would expect it to. So I guess it's processing it. And then you can choose where to actually send it to. So you can just have it as a saved video and it'll save it in your photos, or you can send it to obviously any other place that you want to store it. Okay, so I created a second canvas and you can see here I've got two images. So first of all, I transferred the layer which had this element on it. Now I knew it was going to be a fixed element, so what I did with that is I created that as a foreground, so it goes right at the top. It's not enough to just place it at the top, you need to click on here, click foreground, and that means that whatever else you create, this is going to be above everything. So the animation can go on underneath that, but this is always going to remain on top. And because on that layer, the only thing it's got is the actual writing. It hasn't got the background around it filled in. If I just show you that again, if I remove that layer underneath it, you can see it's translucent other than the actual writing. And that was very important, because if you did fill it in and put it as your foreground layer, you wouldn't see anything underneath it. So the next layer, I knew that I wanted to have the name part end up looking like this. So I created this just as a painting first of all, and I knew that was the element I wanted to create. So I put this at the beginning of it, and I changed it as to my background, because I wanted that to remain. If I didn't do that, then it would just exist as a frame, only be there fleetingly for one moment as a frame, and then the rest would continue, and you wouldn't see that throughout the video. So I needed to have that as a constant element. So things would go over the top of it, things could be removed off the top of it and actually reveal that underneath. And that is the technique that I decided I was going to use. Now, another option I could have had is to start with this as just the plain text of my name as a background, and like for example this, because this is the next frame that I actually created. And I could have then created subsequent frames and actually had the pencil move across and actually paint the effects of fire as I went along. This is one of the things with animation. There's more than one way to actually, it seems, there's more than one way to actually achieve an effect. I'm new to this, so I'm sure there are people that have more experience of animation that are just watching what I'm doing and thinking, why on earth am I approaching it this way? But this is, as a completely kind of novice to animation, this is the way that just seemed logical at the time. Now, I sort of created a painting, and then I thought, well, I can have the pencil going across, and all I need to do is erase segments of this layer that sits on top, step by step, incrementally, and then it would slowly but surely reveal the thing that goes underneath it. Now, I guess I could have just painted that as it goes along on the frames, but this way I knew exactly what the painting was going to be at the end. It just felt like less of a gamble this way. So again, I had to have an element of the Apple Pencil that I could manipulate and move around and actually show the impact that it's having. But the first point at which you actually see it having any impact is just as it starts to come in frame again. Let's go into that frame, press and hold the add frame, and you can see it's completely duplicated. Now, I don't want to do that. It's just going to add more complications to the animation. I've already saved it as an MP4, but I don't really want to ruin what I've already created. But basically, if I just minimize this, you can see the edge. You can see that I just started to move it step by step along the way. And I kept doing that until I actually got to the beginning of my name. And then you can start to see I created something of an impact. So I'm just creating some actual little sparks. So the way that I did that was literally, I've got the element that is just, I've been moving within the selection, but then I literally hand draw the sparks on it. Now, again, just like I was doing before, this was important to keep track of where I'm up to, remove the frames that are underneath. Now, you can either do it by just unticking them or moving the element so it's directly underneath, because it is now at this point starting to remove. So literally, I was on this here, and I'll show you again. I can show you a little bit more. So if I start to erase bits of it, it starts to reveal, slowly but surely reveal the elements that are underneath. Now, I only wanted to do that a stage at a time, obviously. So on that frame, I'm just erasing a little bit. Frame above, I'm erasing a little bit more. Frame above, erasing a little bit more, and so on. And you can see that I just decided to do that process all the way along until we pretty much reached the end of the name. Now, once I reached a point where the pencil had actually sort of gone beyond the written element, I could have just left it so that nothing happened, but what I decided to do was just a little bit at a time start adjusting the kind of glowing effect. So there'll just be some little glitches. I might add some more elements, and you can probably see there only subtle changes. So there's just little dots, little things. So it would suggest that the kind of embers are still glowing and sort of flickering. I did that for quite a few more frames still, just to create the overall effect. So it means basically when I play the whole thing, you can see the impact that actually has. So it literally is the pencil dragging across, seems to sort of set it on fire, and then beyond that point there's a kind of flickering that just lasts for a moment or two. I actually looped that on the animation when I was editing it for the intro, and then I pieced the two animations together. So I simply export that again, share it as an MP4, set it to where I want to be, export it, piece the two things together within your editing app, whatever you want to use yourself. You could do it with an iMovie or something you've downloaded as a different app for editing. I use LumaFusion. It's a really good app, really versatile. It's quite professional. It's not cheap. It's not free, but considering everything that you can get out of it, I think it's good value. It's got my imagination going already, really, in terms of the kind of things that I might start to do with animation. I might take some of my old paintings and start to create elements that I animate. I know I've seen various things on Facebook where you can create sort of 3D versions of your paintings and actually separates the layers. And if you move your phone, it seems to move it. That gives a different spin on it. And I can also see that I might add animated elements to my paintings as well. Anyway, I hope that's give you a little bit more of a flavour of what the animation within Procreate can actually do, and ways that you might want to use it yourself. You can do really simple things or you can do really complex things, it seems. I'm sure there are better animation programs out there that give you tons more options, but if you already own Procreate and you're predominantly a painter and drawer, this is an absolutely amazing additional feature to the suite of features that Procreate has been offering for years. Anyway, I'm going to do more painting tutorials. Do check my playlist. I'm also going to do, like I say, a full app guide for Procreate 5. So stay tuned for that if you want to learn more about the new features that they've added to this already fantastic app. Thanks for watching. See you again soon.